The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Wallace. I am subbing in for Chuck Bargeron for today's NISAW webinar. Today we will be having a presentation by Carrie Brown Lima. Carrie Brown Lima is a Senior Extension Associate and the Director of the New York Invasive Species Research Institute at the Department of Natural Resources at Cornell University. In this role, she works closely with research scientists, state and federal agencies, the New York Invasive Species Council and Advisory Committee, and regional managers and stakeholders to promote innovation and improve the scientific basis of invasive species management. Carrie has nearly 20 years of experience working with natural resource conservation and management across ecosystems and borders. Prior to her position with the Research Institute, Carrie spent 11 years promoting conservation strategies and partnerships in Brazil and throughout Latin America on diverse programs such as sustainable fisheries certifications, agriculture and conservation in transboundary protected areas. I just wanted to let everyone know that this presentation is being recorded, as all of the NISAW webinars are. They will be available on YouTube as well as on the NAIPC website and the NISAW website. You will be allowed to put your questions in the chat box throughout her presentation, and at the end of the presentation I'll read any questions that come up so that she may answer them on the webinar, and those will be recorded as well. So I'd like to thank Carrie for joining us today, and I'll let her get started on her presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca, for the introduction. And I'd also like to thank Sherry Williams and Chuck Bargeron for inviting me to be a part of this webinar series this week. It's a pleasure to be here. And so I'm going to dive right in and get started since Rebecca gave me such a thorough introduction. Let me make sure I can advance my slides here. Okay, great. So I'd like to just start by going back in time a little bit to the beginning of my career. And back in 1997, my first job out of undergrad was working for Fort Drum Military Reservation. And this is when I really had the opportunity, and my interest was piqued in this intersection between invasive species research and invasive species management. At this time, I had the opportunity to work on many different projects. I was out in the field all day, monitoring wildlife, interviewing fishermen, and also working on a control program for purple loosestrife, an invasive species that is a big deal here in New York, and I think in many other parts of the country. At the time, we were spending a lot of resources and investing a lot of energy into rearing biological control agents for release to control purple loosestrife, on the premise that we were protecting wildlife that would use that habitat if that purple loosestrife wasn't there. There was a lot of reference to the idea that purple loosestrife was really bad for wildlife, and so by controlling it, we were actually going to improve wildlife habitat. However, as I started getting more interested in the topic, I really dug in to the research, to the literature, and found that we really didn't have any scientific evidence that purple loosestrife was actually negatively impacting wildlife. And so therefore, our efforts to control it, if we were controlling it to protect wildlife, weren't really necessarily going to reach that objective. And so I won't get into the research that I actually ended up doing as my grad work following this initial interest. But my point was that actually a lot of times we're making a lot of management decisions without information or scientific information to back it up. And so the opportunity to work with the Research Institute and really start bridging that gap between invasive species research and management decisions was really exciting to me. So fast forwarding 20 years here, well, as you all know, many of you on the phone, I'm sure, are invasive species managers and know that we're really seeing a large increase in the introduction of invasive species and the spread of invasive species. Since I was out in the field monitoring purple loosestrife, we've seen a 4-fold increase in shipping, 3-fold increase in air travel, and with all the movement of goods around the world, our surveillance really can't keep up with it. And so we have this, this real increase in movement, in introduction, and research predictions are showing us that even though we may have already had a bunch of introductions, so therefore we've reduced the pool of potential new introductions, the rate of accelerating imports will actually give us a constant establishment rate over in the foreseeable future of new invasive species. And so this is a really great problem that requires a lot of thinking and innovation to address. With that in mind, when President Obama put forth the amendment to the Executive Order on Invasive Species back in 2016, he highlighted in this executive order that we should really be thinking about science and technology when addressing invasive species issues, and really promoting sharing of data, advancing technology, molecular tools, promoting citizen science, and so forth. So really highlighting science as a potential to help curb the impacts of invasive species in the introduction of new species. This was also reinforced by a campaign from the National Invasive Species Council through their work with the Innovation Summit, which was a really interesting gathering that I had the pleasure of being a part of and participating in, where they were really trying to bring together innovators, new technology as this potential solution, and really coined the phrase, we can do this, we can really address invasive species if we really put our heads together on it. And in line with the increase in invasive species, we've also seen a huge increase in the amount of research being conducted on invasive species. This actually only goes through September of 2011, so it's not quite as up to date, and that's why the last bar is lower, because it stopped in September. But you can really see the increase, the extreme increase in the amount of scientific publications on invasive species. However, despite this increase in invasive species research, there continues to be a gap between invasive species research and management. And MassTech, in her 2014 Conservation Letters article, coined this the knowing-doing gap. And she said that there's a gap between research and practice, so that scientific information accumulates, but is not incorporated into management action. And this really goes with the idea that we're going to produce research, and eventually it's just going to trickle down and be absorbed into our decisions, into our policy and management decisions, and kind of along the same lines as trickle-down economics. The idea is that, it starts at the top and it will eventually get to all the people who need it. But actually, that's not really the case. And as we've seen with this little cartoon on trickle-down economics, trickle-down science also isn't all that effective. And I'd never really heard it called trickle-down approach until I was reading about it in Enquist et al. That was published back in 2017. And the reason why this is not really going to be an effective model is that when MassTech continued to look at and interview invasive species managers and invasive species decision makers, she quickly found that really invasive species managers aren't getting their information from peer-reviewed journals. In fact, if I could make this slide bigger, peer-reviewed journals would be way across the other side of my office, and really where they're getting their information from, where a lot of people are getting their information from, are from informal conversations, from their own experiences and experiments. They are getting it from written material that's synthesized in books and conference and symposium attendance, but really the idea that this knowledge is just going to make its way out there into the world is not a good assumption. And so the same article that was talking about trickle-down approach also says, okay, well, when trickle-down approach is one approach, but then there's also this idea of knowledge transfer. The idea of where you're getting out and you're sharing information, you're giving a talk, you're communicating about research, and that this will actually, now that people know about the research, they're actually going to use it. But what we actually see is that oftentimes the information that's produced isn't actually a fit for the questions that we have or the information that we need. I think of it kind of like trying to put a square peg into a round hole. You can kind of make it fit, but it's really not the right fit, and it won't actually function in the same way as it would if you had made that information specifically for that end use. And so this is kind of along lines with the model that we've been thinking about, not thinking about this model that has kind of persisted over the years, where research happens in academic institutions, where people are testing big ideas, they're putting it out in journals in a form that's difficult to access and interpret. The timeframes aren't really all that appropriate for addressing urgent needs. Sometimes we make generalizations, and the experiments are large scale, so they don't take into account the solutions that are needed, the best practices, the immediate results, and the context-specific information that we need. And so they've kind of been siloed over time. And so moving from knowledge transfer then to actually this idea that we should be thinking more about the co-production of knowledge, a process that produces usable or actionable science through collaborations between scientists and those who use science to make policy management decisions. And in this model of co-production of knowledge, managers can identify research needs and participate in the research process, and researchers tailor research to answer the questions. And so this actionable science, they define as data, analyses, projections, or tools that can support decisions in natural resource management that doesn't just include information, but it also gives guidance and how to use that information. And so this new model that we're seeking is this model where invasive species research and management are actually coupled, where science is actually able to drive management decisions, and managers and policymakers participate in and they direct the research that's getting done. And this could actually bring it together with policy, so we're actually able to influence policy and communicate with policymakers in a meaningful way. So getting back to this little diagram on the co-production of knowledge, there's only one caveat to that there's actually a lot of extra work that goes into co-production of knowledge. And a lot of times that's not accounted for in the busy schedules of managers who are tasked with dealing with invasive species and 100 other things on their land that they're responsible for. And also with researchers who are really have certain criteria they need to meet with publications and bringing in grant funding and teaching and so on. And so this extra step of communication, coordination, and collaboration can often be an obstacle that's difficult to overcome. And so in this, I keep going back to this NQuist, this article that really talks about translational research or co-produced research. And they gave this great little diagram here where they identify that there's research on one end, there's practice on the other, and then there's this whole realm of translational ecology where the coordination, collaboration, and communication happens. And this actually, a lot of times, is where a bridging organization comes in. And so I just wanted to provide you this background on my thinking and on the thinking that the field is moving in about how to integrate science and management. But as we're talking about bridging organizations, I'd like to transition a little bit now into the New York Invasive Species Research Institute, which is a bridging organization that I'm working with here in New York State. And the role of the Research Institute is to communicate and coordinate invasive species research to help prevent and manage the impacts of invasive species in New York State and beyond. So before I move forward, what I'd like to do is kind of set the stage for what's going on here in New York, so you can see how the Research Institute, who the Research Institute's partners are in the network that we're working within. And then I'll move into talking about some examples of the way we've collaborated on research and kind of highlight some of the projects that we have going on that integrate the research and manager worlds. So Just giving you a little background here in New York State, back in 2003, Governor Pataki at the time, he realized that New York had a big invasive species problem that was ever growing, and he put together a task force to explore invasive species issues and asked them to come back with recommendations on it. And in 2005, this task force published a report with 12 recommendations that they thought would address invasive species in the state. And so what I'm going to describe are those recommendations here. So first of all, we needed a leadership structure. So we have an invasive species council here in New York State that's represented, in which 9 of the agencies, our state agencies, are represented, and it's led by our Ag and Markets and our environmental conservation departments. And it really addresses policy issues, prioritizing funding, and makes legal recommendations. Much like the federal level, we also have an invasive species advisory committee that's made up of 25 members from NGOs, academia, industry, and so on. And we also have our boots on the ground, and it's really great to have every region of New York covered by a full-time partnership for regional invasive species management. And like the SISMAs, our PRISMs are really have the objective to bring together all the different land managers and organizations in that region that are addressing invasive species issues so that they could work collaboratively and coordinate work, set priorities together, and have the most impact. And these are full-time funded programs that actually have been growing and expanding. It started out with just a full-time coordinator for each PRISM, but now they actually have staff that can implement some of the actions and strategies that they come up with. We also have a database, much like EdMaps, IMAPS Invasive is a citizen science database where we are training both professionals and citizen scientists to collect data on invasive species throughout the state so we can get a better idea of where those species are found. We're also this database is in the process of its 3rd version, and in this version people will actually be able to put in management actions and size of stance and not just presence. And so this gives you an overview of what our comprehensive invasive species management program looks like in New York State and how we all interact with each other. And the funding for this program comes from the New York State Environmental Protection Fund. And so all these groups and organizations have a whole number of approaches to addressing invasive species, from assessing species and creating prohibited and regulated species lists, to campaigns to prevent the spread, to boat wash stations, to surveillance, to actually implementing management actions. So we've got a diverse set of activities going on. What I'd really like to hone in on is get back to the Research Institute now and how it's been working with these groups. So the Research Institute works in 5 main areas. The first area is understanding the research landscape. And so what we really want to know is who's doing what and where. In addition to knowing our partners and working with the PRISMs and the state agencies through the council and the advisory committee, we're also really trying to identify what research is being done, by whom, where, on what species, so that we can engage with them and address those issues together. So we actually have an expert database on our website that we are continually trying to grow and expand and update so that we can have a good idea and a good access to a list of who's doing what, not just from New York State, but anything that's relevant to our work in New York State. And so I mentioned that direct transfer of information. We do some of that too. So the Research Institute coordinates an annual invasive species conference here in New York. It's hosted at Cornell. It's an in-service. We have a monthly webinar series. We have a series of symposiums and workshops throughout the years. We also have a website that holds all of this, a lot of the information, including a blog. We summarize research And we have also we have a Twitter, and we have different communication venues. We also have the databases, and we've even worked with a short video and are currently supporting, working with a documentary that the state of New York is producing on invasive species. But in addition to just communicating about existing research, we take an annual survey of our stakeholders, mainly the PRISMs who talk to their partners, and also the agencies that we work with. And we try to figure out what their research needs and priorities are. And so we get a lot of answers back on the different things, and then we rank them. And we've actually had the partners rank them as well, so that we can understand what their greatest perceived needs are. And then we also start taking those needs and seeking out different individuals or researchers or research that's going on to address those needs, and start coming up with strategies for how we can address it. And so really what drives our priorities and strategies and projects is these stakeholder identified needs, but also we look at national and state priorities and executive orders, as I mentioned, and also emerging issues, species, solutions, and technologies that might not be on the radar or might be up and coming, so that we can introduce and engage on those issues as well. And then also opportunities that arise along the way. And so moving away from this communication and identification of research processes, or research projects and needs, I'd like to move into some of the research that we've actually coordinating and the promotion of collaboration, as well as some newer ideas and cross-discipline solutions that we've been looking at. So getting back to the initial executive order on invasive species that I mentioned earlier, one of the things that highlights in it that was a change and an addition to the prior original executive order on invasive species was considering the impacts of climate change when working on issues relevant to invasive species. However, our managers were coming back to us and saying, how can we manage for upcoming biological invasions in light of climate change? What does that mean? What does that look like? How would we incorporate this into our management plans and our actions? So when that need kept coming in from our different partners, we got together with the USGS Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center, Tony Lynn Morelli, and also with Bethany Bradley from UMass Amherst, who's been working extensively with invasive species and climate change. And we put together a workshop with stakeholders from across the Northeast, both researchers, policymakers, and managers. And because we really wanted to understand, okay, you want to understand invasive species in light of climate change, but what exactly do you need to know? And then also, let's think about what we already know. So this uniting of researchers and managers in this meeting was really useful in coming up with a game plan moving forward. So following that 2016 workshop, we established the Northeast Regional Invasive Species and Climate Change Management Network. We call it the Northeast Risk Network. And since that time, we took those recommendations and we started bringing together annually, for the past 2 years, we brought together researchers and managers to present and share information through working groups, through presentations, and through panels on how they're addressing invasive species with climate change, and also the knowledge that we have in the research community about the topic. We also have a listserv now that has over 200 members, and we share research summaries and management syntheses that are like kind of white papers via this listserv. And then we've also had a couple of side meetings with researchers and managers to try to develop research proposals to address some of the more specific needs. And so here's just a little clip on what some of the management challenges we've come up with, these white papers look like. And also on our listserv, we send out summaries either weekly or bi-weekly on different new research that comes out that addresses invasive species and climate change, that kind of boils it down, so you don't have to go in and read the whole article and try to work through the details. But one of the research projects that I'd like to focus on that came out of this interaction between managers and researchers on climate change and invasive species has been headed up by Dr. Jenica Allen from the University of New Hampshire. And Jenica had started in her postdoc, she was looking at creating watch lists for different states by working with climate models and current and future ranges of invasive species. She was coming up with predictions on which species were likely to move into states under different climate scenarios and in the near future. And so Jenica came to New York, and one of her first states that she did was New York State to come up with this list. And so this list was then communicated at one of our conferences with our stakeholders. And they took the list, and they've actually been assessing this list and considering some of these species proactively for our regulated and prohibited species list. That's not to say that all of them on this list will make it through, but this is one of the first times in New York State, at least, where we've taken species that weren't already here or weren't already right on our borders and actually considered them for listing. And so this research was really important, a really important step in helping us to guide policy actions moving forward. And so Jenica took this research one step forward with some funding from the Northeast IPM Center and is actually working with Chuck's group down in Georgia to make an online app that people can actually go in and figure out for your own state under different climate scenarios which species, and this is actually, I should be specific, current model is focusing on plant species that are likely to move in so that managers and decision makers can form watch lists or consider listing as well. So this should be coming out in the near future, and so keep an eye out for this. But this was a really cool tool that came out of these meetings that Jenica and our group had with managers. And then taking this one step further, Bethany Bradley and with one of her students took a vetted process for ranking impact of species and took all these species that Jenica was producing and actually started ranking them for whether they should be high priority, medium priority, or low priority based on the impacts we expected. And so this also helps with decision making for invasive species, as people can not just take the full list, but actually look at some of the highest impact species and try to avoid those impacts by keeping those species out. So just in summary on this invasive species and climate change initiative, this is an ongoing initiative, and we welcome anyone who's interested in this topic to join our listserv, to check out the resources on our website. This year, we'll be having an annual symposium sometime between September 30th and October 2nd in conjunction with the North American Invasive Species Management Association Conference, so keep an eye out for that. It'll be hosted in New York this year. And also, if you're doing research or management and incorporating climate change and you want to share some of that information, please do let us know. So moving ahead from climate change, I'd like to move on to another area that we've really found there's a need for this interaction between research and management. And one of the areas that we've been addressing is this rethinking of management objectives and measures of success. Oftentimes in invasive species management, we quantify how our success by how much we removed or how many acres we treated, when really, like back with my purple loosestrife example, we actually do have a final objective in mind. Sometimes it's bringing back the native species that we care about, or sometimes it's just providing a clear open lake for recreation. But we do have objectives, and we should be measuring or trying to measure our success based on those objectives. And so this is particularly important because there's so many different factors that are affecting biodiversity in our ecosystems, ranging from climate change to overpopulation of ungulates to pollution to land use change. So it's hard to really know whether the species that we're managing or we're deciding whether to manage or not, are actually the drivers of change in degraded ecosystems, or they're just along for the ride. They're just there because there was a disturbance and they took advantage of it. So we should really be thinking about, as we're prioritizing and moving management efforts forward, we need to be thinking about which of these species we should be addressing. And I just want to give a little example here. One species that we are dealing with here in New York State is hemlock woolly adelgid, and as many of you who are familiar with hemlock woolly adelgid know, it is a huge impact species. We're losing hemlock forests, there's ecosystem impacts, there's loss of species, there's changes in our water quality, and so it's a really big impact species. However, there's other species, like, for example, Japanese stiltgrass here in New York. Now, we can assume that when we see a big patch of invasive stiltgrass out in the forest, that this species swept in, took over, and eliminated our native trilliums and all the other beautiful forest floor species that we love. And so this is actually, this slide here was one that I found on the internet when I was putting together a class on invasive species. But actually, based on the research, we know that this is not actually the case, at least here in New York State, and it may be in other places. So while we're seeing an increase in stiltgrass and other invasive species here in New York, we're also seeing an increase in deer population. And what we know about deer is deer can eat a lot, and they really like native species. This video here is taken from an oak planting experiment. We are looking at impacts of a research group here at Cornell, and Baron Plassey's lab was looking at impact of deer browsing on regeneration of oak. And this little video just shows how much one deer can eat in a couple of seconds when it comes to invasive species. And so Dr. Plassey's group, he's been working with Dr. Andrea Davalos as well, took a 5-year experiment, and they were fencing out deer to see how that impacted some of our forest floor invasive species, and found that once you block deer out using fencing, stiltgrass abundance went way down. Not only that, but when a transplant experiment, they found that the adult trillium actually did much better when deer were excluded, and even native trillium had higher emergence when some stiltgrass was present once you removed deer. And so this decline in trillium and this increase in stiltgrass, the stiltgrass wasn't driving the decrease in our native plant species. It was actually the deer. So in this case, for a manager to make a decision that would actually protect the species they're looking to protect, it would have to be more focused on managing deer and less focused on managing stiltgrass. And so it's really important, and we can learn a lot from when our management efforts are successful if we actually monitor and analyze the data. And so we've seen throughout the Great Lakes a lot of investment in Phragmites management. And a lot of times this management, even though millions of dollars are spent, we don't really know whether it's effective or not. So I know that the Phragmites Collaborative now is really advancing with collecting data on this. But here in New York, in the Adirondacks, they actually collected data on their Phragmites control, and they then took that data and they partnered with some researchers here at Cornell and analyzed it and found that any patch that was of any significant size had almost 0% chance of eradication. So the probability of eradicating it was almost nothing. And so this really would help guide management efforts when we're thinking about the size of the patch and whether we should embark on trying to control it. We've also had requests from other managers. In fact, our partners here at New York State Parks have been spending a lot of time and resources to control invasive swallowwort. And along a similar line, they also partnered with a researcher, Dr. Davalos from SUNY Cortland. And this partnership was facilitated by the Research Institute, who identified their need and got together a research group to work on it. They've been actually monitoring different management strategies to try to see which one is more effective. And so, but this relationship wouldn't have been formed if it wasn't for the involvement of the Research Institute. Another high priority research need that we see coming a lot from our partners across the state are requests for more sustainable management solutions for some of the more widespread species that they're not able to control. And so the Research Institute's been devoting a lot of energy and time to try to promote certain biological control agents for some species that are really problematic here. So just to highlight a couple of them, there's water chestnut biocontrol that's been advancing and is going to be submitted for review by TAG. Also, there's Phragmites biocontrol research that's been going on and funded through the Department of Transportation here. Hemlock woolly adelgid biocontrol program has been supported by the New York State DEC. And also, we just recently got, and I'll highlight this in my coming slides, put together a research group to work on the biocontrol of swallowwort. And so because biocontrols are such a research-intensive process, this has really been a great opportunity for the Research Institute to engage with groups of researchers and help connect with funding and also help connect with managers to work on releasing those agents. So for example, last year, the first biocontrol for swallowwort, Hyphaenopia lenta, was approved here in the United States. It had been previously approved in Canada a few years earlier. And so since swallowwort is such a huge problem here in New York State, we actually put together a research group. Some folks that had already been researching it, Dr. Lindsay Milbrath and his partner Jeremy there have been looking at it, but we brought together researchers from 4 other universities and helped the Department of Transportation obtain funding, actually $750,000, to promote the release and monitoring and rearing of Hyphaenopia lenta, together with Dylan Perry, who's the PI on the project now, Andrea Davalos, Jackie Schnur, and with support from Lisa Tewksbury from the University of Rhode Island. And so this project and this partnership were really facilitated, and now we have a full program to address this species. And so we're really excited to see how that's going to go moving forward. Another project I'd like to highlight that was a really exciting, and it's been an ongoing project, was a request that came from our managers. So they had so many species to manage in such a large area and so many different project types that they didn't know which ones to prioritize. And so we got together a structured decision-making workshop, and we worked to see if there were any existing tools that could potentially help the managers and the prisons in New York State make more strategic investments and optimize their invasive species management decisions. And when we realized that this actually wasn't, there wasn't an existing tool that we could use to meet our objectives, we put together a group of researchers from computer science, from the New York Fish and Wildlife Research Unit, together with partners from the state from IMAP Invasives and the Department of Environmental Conservation, to develop a decision tool for informing invasive species management. And this is led by postdoc Jen Price-Tack here, who has really done a phenomenal job of really tapping into all the knowledge of our prisms and our prison leaders across the state to help bring together data that wasn't all already in IMAP and try to develop this optimization tool. This has been a really exciting process, and we'll hopefully later this year be able to be testing the tool and refining it. So this was a really interesting partnership across disciplines that we're enjoying a lot. And another outcome of once you start working with a group, you can really tap into other areas that need their expertise. Once we started working with the computer science group, they realized that Mark Whitmore here, who was releasing biocontrol agents, needed some assistance in deciding what the best strategy would be to release those. And so they actually put together, wrote a paper, came up with an algorithm to address this, and it was just a really fun side partnership that came out of this. I see I'm getting short on time here, so I'll keep going along here. But another area that really has been an exciting front that we've been trying to address is the idea of identifying and promoting technology for early detection. And here in New York State, we have a lot of water, and we have a lot of potential use of eDNA to detect invasive aquatic species. However, there was this request and need to understand what was the state of technology and how could it actually be implemented and used for management, early detection, and rapid response purposes. So I'm really fortunate that Dr. David Lodge recently moved to New York State and was able to partner with us on a workshop that brought together almost 100 participants. They were about half and half, about half researchers and half managers, to really talk about where the state of eDNA research is, and then talk about how managers actually deal with that information when a high priority species or a high impact species is detected. And the workshop identified a lot of challenges in using eDNA, like the varying laboratory size and experience and the concern over quality, this inconsistency in communication between researchers and natural resource managers about when they find a species and whether that's a verified find or not. It's highly sensitive for false positives, and there was a need for more quality control. And we started to come up with some solutions moving forward that will hopefully be implemented as the state thinks more closely about using eDNA. But really the idea that we need to improve these communications between researchers and managers and coming up with a way to do that, establishing some sort of a certification for quality control, and that we were actually missing a lot of opportunities to use eDNA. So really by bringing together this group to brainstorm it, we were able to come up with a path forward that we may not have had had it not been for this workshop. Another fun area that we've been exploring here in New York State and recently had Working Dogs for Conservation come is the use of detection dogs for early detection for invasive species. And our Lower Hudson PRISM is the first to pioneer this, and we're looking forward to testing the effectiveness with them of detecting invasive species with their new dogs. And as I'm getting close to wrapping up here, we've also been working really closely to try to communicate policy recommendations and to solicit expert opinions to help guide policy decisions. And sometimes we've got a lot of great resources out there, but it doesn't actually reach the ears of our decision makers here. We have a great example of the Tree Smart Trade Initiative led by Gary Lovett. It really was thought-provoking here in New York as they proposed different ways to prevent forest pest introduction. Here in New York, we have more forest pests than any other state, and this is a really big deal for us. So finding and having a research group come together with policymakers and actually communicate. We didn't lead that process, NISAW didn't lead that process, but we were part of communicating it to our network of policymakers here. Also, with the arrival of the southern pine beetle, we sought out and synthesized expert opinions on how to address that. And now with the new and up and coming potential threat of the spotted lanternfly, we've been fortunate to be able to pull together an expert group to address those, to address the questions that come up as we come up with a response plan here in New York State. And one fun and exciting project coming up is, well, in addition to helping to connect experts with the public, Doug Talamy, through a connection that we connected in with our state magazine, was able to write a really interesting and fun article for our popular magazine here. But also we've, together with the state agency, we put together a proposal, and now we have a documentary being created here in New York State to conduct more outreach on invasive species. So really, in wrapping up here, moving forward, as we're thinking about bridging the gap between invasive species management and research, some suggestions I would have is that really to have a bridging organization such as the Research Institute that can help to facilitate these connections and make some of these kinds of projects happen, really promoting the co-production of invasive species research and making sure that the research is solicited, the research needs are solicited from the end users, and also communicating with our funding agencies and promoting the development of funding sources that can help meet the needs of these joint research initiatives. And I just, as I'm finalizing here, I'd like to do a plug for those of you who are interested in this topic of connecting science to action. The Research Institute is co-hosting this year the North American Invasive Species Management Association Conference. And we're looking for, we have a call for abstracts out right now, also a call for workshops or special sessions. So if you're interested in presenting, please check out the website and submit an abstract. If you're interested in just learning about some of the research that's been going on, then please plan to come. So thank you all and for listening, and I can take any questions, Rebecca, that people have sent in.
Well, while people are finding that chat box so that they can ask any questions they may have, I do have a couple questions I came up with to get the ball rolling. So you touched on it a bit at the end about some of the kind of reaching out to the public itself outside of your partnership, outside of land managers and so forth. What other types of things besides like the magazine article and the documentary are you doing to engage the public at large to tell them about the problems that invasive species cause within New York?
So while we do some outreach, most of the work, the way the Research Institute was set up was to actually be able to provide, so since we work within this greater network with the PRISMs and the outreach and education branch of the New York State DEC, our role is actually to provide them with the connections and the information and to develop the research to meet their needs. And then they have the role to conduct outreach to the public. So we have less direct interactions with the public. We do also work, Cornell is the land grant university, so we do have some projects, actually a couple that are starting up right now that are working with our Cornell Cooperative Extension. But we more serve in the role of connecting the managers or the educators with the information, and then eventually they subsequently communicate it with the public.
Okay. Is there any participation from groups within the green industry, since you were talking about some of the work that's been done on evaluating invasive species potential in New York, even if it's not there yet, through modeling? Have they been agreeable, disagreeable with some of the movement on whether species would be considered regulated and therefore not able to be sold in New York?
So the original prohibited and invasive species list that was created by the state, they were engaged with that process. And now as this is moving forward, this is all pretty new. So I think part of the plan of this research is to also engage and educate as we come up with lists and the plan moving forward. So yeah.
Okay. And one other thing, you were mentioning that the modeling for helping land managers prioritize invasive species, what species they would focus on if they have a lot going on their properties. Something I had heard about last year. Are you familiar with the SIPA model?
Which model?
SIPA, SIIPA. It's where's the there it is. Spatial Invasive Infestation and Priority Analysis Model.
Oh, neat. So, I know that probably the postdoc Jen Price, who's been working on this, is certainly familiar with all of them, right?
Okay.
But
Well,
I haven't heard that one. I'll have to mention it to her. Thanks.
yeah, it's one that that I heard about last year at a conference, and so I didn't know if that was one that was being considered. I'm not exactly certain how new it is, so I know I at least heard about it maybe about 6 months ago, 4 to 6 months ago. So, and it was a little bit older than that at least. So I just didn't know if that was something you were familiar with as a model for helping land managers prioritize based off of several different metrics, including, infested area size and so forth. So,
Oh, neat. Okay, great. I'll have to check it out.
yeah. So, well, I guess you did such a great job. We don't have any questions currently. So I'll go ahead and thank you for giving your presentation. It was extremely informative. I found a lot of things going on I didn't know that were going on in New York. So I wanted to thank you for your presentation and your time to participate in the NISAW webinar series.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. I appreciate it.
All right, everyone, as I mentioned before, this presentation, as well as every other presentation, will be made available through YouTube, as well as through the NISAW website and the NAIPC website. Please come back tomorrow for same time for another presentation. It's supposed to be pretty good. And if you have any questions or need any help, again, my name is Rebecca Wallace. I'll be around to host again tomorrow. So thank you again, Carrie, and I hope to see everyone tomorrow.
Thanks so much. Have a good day.
You too.